Okay, so it seems like everywhere you turn these days, you hear about how hard relationships are.
Yeah, it's like everyone's struggling.
And, I think a lot of people, especially when, things end
Yeah.
early on, you start to wonder, like, is it just harder than ever to find a relationship that actually lasts?
Right. Is it even possible?
And so for this deep dive, we wanted to, like, really get into, what's going on.
Yeah.
We're looking at some of the work of Sadia Khan. She's an online coach, a therapist, and a psychologist.
Okay. Interesting.
And she has some really interesting insights into, why relationships fail,
Yeah.
and specifically why so many seem to fall apart within that first year.
That first year is so crucial, right?
It really is, yeah.
I mean, that's kind of like make it or break it time for a lot of couples.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's just dive right in, because one of the first things that really stood out to me is this idea of the illusion of options.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Can you kind of explain how that plays into all of this?
Well, we're living in this digital age, right? And I think it's really changed the whole dating landscape. I mean, think about it. You've got online dating platforms,
Oh, yeah.
social media, and even just the easy access to pornography. All of these things kind of contribute to this feeling that there's just an endless supply of potential partners out there.
Yeah, it's like, instead of really getting to know the person in front of you,
Right.
you're always kind of thinking, well, maybe there's someone better.
Mm-hmm.
Just to swipe away. Yeah,
Exactly. And that's what makes it so hard to commit because you don't want to miss out on that.
totally. So you're saying that all this choice actually makes us less likely to commit.
It kind of backfires,
Yeah.
because on the one hand, you have this abundance of options,
Right.
but it creates a scarcity mindset in reverse.
Yeah.
The fact that there's this perception of infinite choice actually devalues the person you're with
Yeah.
because you're thinking there's always something better out there.
It's like the Amazon Prime of relationships.
Exactly.
If it's not perfect, you just return it and get something else.
Yeah, you got it. And so you end up with this consumer mentality where you're always evaluating and comparing,
Yeah.
and you're more likely to just discard someone
Yeah.
rather than actually working through the challenges.
Okay, so we're kind of coming into a relationship already with this baggage of, like, maybe there's something better out there.
Right.
So what's, like, the most important question that we should be asking ourselves before we even get serious with someone?
Well, Sadia Khan puts it pretty bluntly.
Okay.
She says, ask yourself, how are my personal insecurities going to ruin this relationship?
Wow, that's kind of intense.
It is, but it really makes you think, you know?
Yeah, why is it so important to focus on ourselves like that?
Because let's face it, we all come into relationships with baggage, unhealed wounds, insecurities, things like that, and they're going to come up eventually.
Always do.
And when they do, we often end up projecting them onto our partners.
Projecting, what does that mean exactly?
It's basically a defense mechanism where we take our own unacceptable thoughts or feelings and we attribute them to someone else.
So, like, instead of dealing with our own stuff,
Right.
we blame our partner for it.
Exactly. So, for example, let's say you're really insecure about your finances. You might start accusing your partner of being irresponsible with money,
Oh, I see.
even if they're not.
So we're blaming them for problems that we already had.
Yeah, we're basically setting them up to fail.
That makes sense. Can you give me, like, another example of how this plays out?
Sure. Let's say someone has a pornography addiction.
Okay.
Even if they're in a healthy sexual relationship, they might still feel like it's not enough.
Because of the addiction.
Yeah, because they're comparing it to this unrealistic world of pornography.
Right, it's like they're chasing a high they can't get in real life.
Exactly. And the problem isn't their partner.
It's the addiction.
Right.
Okay, so before we even start thinking about someone else, we need to take a good hard look at ourselves.
Yeah, self-awareness is key.
But once we've identified those insecurities,
Yeah.
How do we actually prevent them from messing things up?
Well, the key is to create a buffer.
A buffer.
It's about acknowledging your insecurities and actively working on them.
Okay, so like through therapy.
Yeah, therapy, self-reflection, healthy coping mechanisms, things like that.
So we're taking responsibility for our own stuff.
Exactly. And you're not expecting your partner to fix you.
Right, because that's not their job.
You're coming into the relationship with a better understanding of your triggers and your vulnerabilities, and you're ready to manage them yourself.
Instead of putting that on someone else.
Right.
Okay, so let's talk about another interesting idea that came up. The rise of narcissism.
Yeah, that's a tricky one.
And how that ties into the need for external validation.
Right. It's interesting because there's this argument that certain aspects of modern society have actually contributed to an increase in narcissistic tendencies.
Okay, how so?
Well, think about it. Social media,
Yeah.
the way online dating is structured, and even some interpretations of feminist ideals.
I could see the social media connection.
Right.
All those likes and comments.
Yeah.
Gotta do something to your ego.
Exactly. It creates this constant need for external approval.
Right.
But the feminism part is a little less clear.
Yeah. Can you explain that a bit more?
Well, the argument is that in some cases there's been a glamorization of certain behaviors
Okay.
that are ultimately self-serving,
Mm-hmm.
and at the same time there's this kind of discouragement of introspection.
Like looking inward and examining yourself.
Exactly. And sometimes that's framed as like rejecting societal expectations or oppression. So it can lead to a lack of personal accountability.
Because you're always blaming external factors.
Right. You're not taking responsibility for your own actions.
So it's not about the core principles of feminism.
No, not at all.
It's more about how some of these ideas are being interpreted.
Yeah, and how it can shift the focus to external validation.
Okay, so we're constantly seeking validation from others.
Mm-hmm. And it becomes addictive.
Addictive. How so?
Well, those likes and followers, they trigger dopamine release.
Oh, wow. So it's like a chemical thing.
It is, and it creates these unrealistic expectations for real-life relationships.
Because how can a real person compete with thousands of online fans?
Exactly. It's not a fair comparison.
So basically, we're building our self-worth on this foundation of external validation.
Mm-hmm. Instead of on something more substantial.
And that brings us to another issue, prioritizing superficial values over intimacy,
Right. We live in a society that puts a lot of emphasis on external things.
like looks and money.
Exactly. And those things aren't inherently bad.
No, of course not.
But when they become the primary drivers in choosing a partner, you end up with these shallow connections.
Like if you only care about someone's bank account.
Right. You're going to attract people who are more interested in your money than in you.
It's like you're buying a relationship instead of building one.
Exactly. And the foundation is weak.
So the glue that holds a relationship together needs to be stronger than just looks or money.
It does. The real glue is emotional intimacy.
That deep sense of connection and understanding.
Right. Vulnerability, shared experiences, all of that.
And that makes your partner feel irreplaceable.
Exactly. Because when the superficial stuff fades, it's that emotional bond that keeps you together.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about infidelity.
Okay.
This is a tough one, but the idea here is that it's often a symptom of deeper issues.
Yeah, it's not just a random act.
There's usually something else going on.
Right. And one argument is that infidelity in women
Okay.
can sometimes stem from the perception that their male partner isn't masculine enough.
Masculine enough. What does that mean?
Well, maybe he's not setting clear boundaries
Yeah.
or he's tolerating disrespectful behavior.
So she's seeking those qualities elsewhere.
Right. And then she might reframe the infidelity
By cop.
by saying things like, oh, he wasn't meeting my
To
needs.
avoid taking responsibility.
Exactly. And on the flip side, infidelity in men
Okay.
is sometimes linked to a perceived lack of femininity in their wives.
Like she's not meeting his needs.
Right. And those needs can be anything from intimacy and support
Yeah.
to even small acts of care.
So it's this complex interplay of needs and expectations.
It is. And it highlights the tension between independence
Yeah.
and that human need for connection.
We want to be our own person,
Right.
but we also crave intimacy and care.
Exactly. And so infidelity becomes a symptom of those unmet needs.
And the lack of emotional intimacy.
There's this concept of locking your doors.
Lock your doors.
It's about being proactive,
Okay.
nurturing the connection, addressing each other's needs.
So you're less likely to stray.
Right. You're building a strong foundation.
Okay, let's talk about redefining what high value really means.
Yeah. We need to move beyond those superficial metrics.
So not just focusing on looks or money.
Right, because those things don't tell you the whole story.
So what should we be looking for in a partner?
Well, for men, true value is increasingly linked to self-control.
Self-control. Interesting.
It's about being able to manage your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors,
Okay.
and making choices that lead to positive long-term outcomes.
So like resisting those immediate gratifications.
Exactly, because a high-value man is someone who's not easily swayed by impulses or external pressures.
He's got his eye on the prize.
Right, he's thinking about the long game.
What about for women? What defines high value for them?
It's about intrinsic qualities,
Like what?
things like the depth of their connections with loved ones,
Okay.
their engagement in meaningful pursuits, their capacity for care and support.
This is more about character and empathy.
Yeah, and having a sense of self-esteem that's not based on external validation.
Because that can be so fleeting.
It is. It's not a solid foundation.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of potential pitfalls. Let's get into some specific red flags.
Okay, warning signs to watch out for.
Sadia Khan highlights 3 big ones.
Okay.
Unacknowledged childhood trauma,
Mm-hmm.
the difference between healthy boundaries and self-sabotage, and the dynamic of competition versus cooperation.
3 really important ones.
Let's start with childhood trauma. How did that show up as a red flag?
Well, unresolved trauma can create these deep-seated beliefs about love and relationships.
Like what?
Beliefs that you're not worthy of love, that love is painful or unreliable.
And that can lead to self-sabotage.
You might unconsciously recreate patterns of chaos or conflict.
To validate those beliefs.
Exactly. And sometimes that intense spark you feel early on
Yeah.
can actually be a sign of this.
Because you're attracted to the drama.
Right. You're recreating familiar pain.
So the key is whether your partner has acknowledged their trauma.
Yes. And whether they're actively working on it.
Okay, let's move on to the next red flag. Healthy boundaries versus self-sabotage.
Okay. That's a crucial distinction.
Can you break that down for me?
Sure. Healthy boundaries are basically clear communications about your needs and expectations.
Okay.
They're like instructions on how to love and respect you.
So it's about being upfront and honest.
Exactly.
Okay.
Self-sabotage, on the other hand, is more about unexpressed resentment,
Okay.
passive aggression, emotional withdrawal.
So you're not communicating directly.
Well, you're creating distance instead of closeness.
Can you give me an example of how that plays out?
Sure. Let's say a couple agrees to have a date night every week.
Okay.
That's a healthy boundary. They're setting aside time for each other,
Right.
but then one partner consistently cancels at the last minute.
Without explaining why.
Right. They're not communicating their needs or their resentments.
So they're sabotaging the relationship.
Exactly.
Okay. And the final red flag, competition versus cooperation.
Mm-hmm. This one's all about whether your partner is truly on your team.
So how do you know if it's competition?
Well, if you bring up a concern,
Yeah.
do they listen and try to understand?
Okay.
Or do they get defensive and dismissive?
So they're not trying to find a solution together.
Right. They're trying to win.
And that's not how healthy relationships work.
No, in a healthy relationship, you're both invested in each other's happiness.
You're working together towards a common goal.
Exactly.
Okay, last but not least, we need to talk about pornography.
Yeah, this is a big one.
It's so pervasive these days.
It is, and it really contributes to a lot of the problems we've been talking about.
Like how?
Well, for starters, it creates that illusion of endless options.
Right.
And it makes it harder to develop genuine intimacy.
Because you're constantly comparing real life to this fantasy world.
Exactly. And for men specifically, pornography offers this instant gratification without any risk of rejection.
So it's like a safe space.
Yeah, but it can hinder the development of important social and emotional
The
skills.
skills you need for real relationships.
Right. And then there's the issue of unrealistic portrayal.
Like those perfect bodies and crazy scenarios.
Exactly. And that can distort your perception of what's normal and healthy.
And make you dissatisfied with real intimacy.
Mm-hmm. It can even contribute to things like erectile dysfunction.
Wow. And the impact isn't just limited to men, is it?
Yeah. No, it's not. There's a growing awareness that pornography can be harmful to women, too.
How so?
Well, it can contribute to a confused sense of sexual identity.
Okay.
It can make you focus on pleasing men rather than yourself.
And it creates these unrealistic expectations about your body and your sexuality.
Exactly. It's a complex issue with a lot of potential downsides.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
Let's recap the main reasons why those first-year relationships tend to fall apart.
Well, we talked about the illusion of options.
Yeah.
How unaddressed insecurities can lead to sabotage. The dangers of prioritizing superficial validation.
Right.
And how a lack of connection can contribute to infidelity.
And we emphasize the importance of self-awareness,
Yeah.
healthy boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
and building a cooperative partnership.
Exactly. It's about being intentional and creating a strong foundation.
So to our listeners out there,
Yeah.
I challenge you to really think about the values that are guiding your choices in relationships.
It's worth taking the time to reflect.
Are you chasing external markers of success?
Mm.
Or are you prioritizing genuine connection and emotional intimacy?
It's a big question, but it's an important one.
And what small step can you take today
Yeah.
to shift your focus inward
To address your own vulnerabilities.
and to cultivate those deeper, more meaningful connections?
Because ultimately, that's what it's all about.
It is. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive,
My pleasure. It was a great conversation.
and we'll see you next time.
See you then.